All righty. So we are amidst the last days of the supposed phase one of the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. And so I just want to refresh people's memory here because I tweeted something about this that some people didn't understand. And I think they didn't understand because most people understood it, but some people didn't. Because I think they were forgetting the context here of Trump just about a week ago saying Israel should end the ceasefire on Saturday, meaning yesterday, and let all hell break out if all of Israeli hostages were not returned, even though the original terms of the ceasefire were to drip them out slowly according to the phases of the ceasefire, so that as hostages come back, we advance the ceasefire steps so that eventually all hostages are returned and a ceasefire permanently is implemented. That's the goal. But Trump tried to change the deal last week and say, hey, if we don't get all the hostages back at once, we should just let all hell break out. So here's that video in case that's not fresh in your mind.
And if all of the hostages aren't returned by Saturday at 12 o'clock, I think it's an appropriate time. I would say cancel it and all bets are off and let hell break out. I'd say they ought to be returned by 12 o'clock on Saturday, and if they're not returned, all of them, not in drips and drabs, not 2 and 1 and 3 and 4 and 2. Saturday at 12 o'clock.
So that was the deadline that he imposed for all hostages to be returned. Now, Saturday has come and gone, and of course, the hostages were returned in accordance with the deal. So Israel and Hamas complete their latest exchange as ceasefire's first phase has just 2 weeks left. So not all hostages were returned. The terms were stuck by. I believe three Israeli hostages were returned in exchange for some Palestinian prisoners, as the media calls them. Of course, we would call them hostages as well. But basically, what Trump said did not happen. And so, because that did not happen, Trump tries to nudge Netanyahu into breaking the ceasefire. Hamas has just released 3 hostages from Gaza, including an American citizen. They seem to be in good shape. This differs from their statement last week that they would not release any hostages. Israel will now have to decide what they will do about the 12 o'clock today deadline in big capital letters imposed on the release of all hostages. The United States will back the decision they make. So that is Donald Trump trying to sabotage the ceasefire deal. Now, my theory about this is that the reason he's doing this is because he knows that his displacement plan is a non-starter. Even a lot of Republican politicians and Republican commentators are not backing him up on that. Even Michael Savage wasn't backing him up on that. That's how you know how much of a non-starter that is. And so because that's a non-starter, he now, in order to avoid taking the L politically, or worse, having to double down and commit troops to Gaza, which is, of course, a complete non-starter with everybody, he now needs for Israel to finish the job. And so that's my theory. Now he realizes that because he stepped in it, he is now trying to sabotage these ceasefires. However, Netanyahu has his own priorities and his own things that he has to be concerned about. That's why this is creating a standoff, not so much between Israel and Gaza, but between Israel and Trump, right? Because they're both kind of afraid to jump first. Netanyahu cagey on Israel's next steps as Trump deadline to free all hostages passes. So this was reported by Times of Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held security consultations Saturday night on the future of the hostage ceasefire deal after Hamas released 3 more living male hostages earlier in the day. Netanyahu wants to expedite the release of 6 remaining living hostages who are scheduled to be freed the next 2 Saturdays, according to Hebrew media reports. Channel 13 reported that Israel is aiming to get the 6 released in the coming days. Last week, U.S. President Donald Trump suggested that Israel end the ceasefire in Gaza and resume fighting if all remaining hostages were not freed by Saturday, after the Hamas terror group said it was delaying their release. Trump said Saturday was up to Israel to decide how to respond to Hamas missing his deadline. Israel, he wrote on his Truth Social, which we just read, must decide what they will do about the 12 o'clock today deadline imposed on the release of all hostages. The United States will back the decision they make. Netanyahu's office on Saturday evening released a vague statement that gave no indication of what Israel will do next. Netanyahu, quote, appreciates the president's full support for Israel's decisions regarding the Gaza Strip going forward, said the prime minister's office. The prime minister will convene the security cabinet as soon as possible to decide Israel's next steps. Netanyahu highly appreciates Trump's leadership and the ongoing coordination with the United States, the statement added. Netanyahu wants to extend the current first phase of the deal beyond the designated 42 days, which are set to end on March 1st, and secure the freedom of more hostages as part of phase one, including more hostages Israel now knows are in poor health, according to Channel 12. The premier reportedly wants Israel's negotiators to argue to the Qatari and Egyptian mediators with U.S. support that it's also in the interest of Hamas to extend phase one and thus the current ceasefire, since phase two has not been finalized and the war would resume if no agreement is reached on phase two. Netanyahu has refused to allow Israel's negotiators to engage in talks on the agreement's second phase, which would see the release of the remaining hostages in exchange for a permanent end to the war. See, now here's where Netanyahu is in a tough spot. Politically, he feels he can't afford to end the war. But politically, he also feels he can't afford to have these hostages killed. Right. And so he is going to lean more on Trump to give him the ultimate victory that Trump basically promised him when he came to Washington, which is, hey, we'll get all these hostages back in a phased ceasefire, and then we're going to ethnically cleanse Gaza, right? Because that is the kind of win-win that could save Netanyahu's face. Absent both of those things coming true, Netanyahu is kind of screwed. So that creates this very strange sort of standoff between the United States and Israel. In the sense that Netanyahu would love to go in and continue fighting because that accomplishes one objective. But if he does that and the hostages get killed, well, then that's a huge problem. Yeah. Exactly, for him as well. Israeli negotiators, however, warned that unless Israel begins serious negotiations on phase two, which were required under the deal to start almost 2 weeks ago, it risks jeopardizing the rest of the scheduled phase one releases. The sixth release of hostages during the ongoing ceasefire came hours before U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio landed in Israel ahead of his meetings on Sunday in Jerusalem with Israeli leaders. He is on his first Middle East trip as America's top diplomat. Rubio indicated last week that renewed fighting in Gaza would not ultimately end the threat that Hamas poses to Israel, just 2 days after he appeared to back a resumption of the war. Someone has to confront Hamas. Who's that going to be? It's not going to be American soldiers. If the countries in the region can't figure that piece out, then Israel's going to have to do it. And then we're back to where we've been, so that doesn't solve the problem. Of course, this is a problem of Trump's creation, because by promising to ethnically purge Gaza, right, and by having that plan really blow up in his face because no one backs him on it, well, now Trump needs Israel to do it, right? Rubio said in an interview with conservative radio host Clay Travis and Buck Sexton. So here is Rubio's piece of the press conference pertaining to the Gaza ceasefire and the future of Gaza.
The president's also been very bold about his view of what the future for Gaza should be. Not the same tired ideas of the past, but something that's bold and something that, frankly, took courage and vision in order to outline. And it may have shocked and surprised many. But what cannot continue is the same cycle where we repeat over and over again and wind up in the exact same place. Related to that, the president's been very clear Hamas cannot continue as a military or government force. And frankly, as long as it stands as a force that can govern, or as a force that can administer, or as a force that can threaten by use of violence, peace becomes impossible. They must be eliminated. They must be eradicated.
Okay, so that suggests no permanent ceasefire. Now, here's what Netanyahu has to say. This is even more ominous. From Kosher, think whose side do you think he's on? Some strong words here.
Hey, Muslims keep kosher too.
That's right. President Trump and I are fully coordinated with a shared strategy. Not everything can be revealed, including when the gates of hell will open. This is Netanyahu with Rubio by his side.
Secretary Rubio for President Trump's assistance in helping us secure the release of another 3 hostages yesterday. These are hostages that Hamas refused to support only a few days to release only a few days earlier. And I also thanked him for America's unequivocal backing for Israel's policy in Gaza in moving forward. I want to assure everyone who's now listening to us, President Trump and I are working in full cooperation and coordination between us. We have a common strategy, and we can't always share the details of this strategy with the public, including when the gates of hell will be opened, as they surely will if all our hostages are not released until the last one of them.
Okay. You put all that together, and it does not look great for a permanent ceasefire before the end of the war. I just don't see how they're able to get there. Trump already tried to sabotage this. I want everybody to understand this. This is a murderous act that he did when he tweeted this. I don't know why this did not get more attention. I don't know why this slipped past people's radar. Maybe too many people were jerking off to J.D. Vance's speech in Germany. Who the hell knows? But he literally tried to blow up the deal. He literally tried to nudge Israel into restarting the war. And don't forget, they have 2,000-pound bombs now because he sent them to them. And he's promising, as Netanyahu just said, the gates of hell opening. Could it be Netanyahu's just trying to get as many hostages back as he can before the deal inevitably collapses? Because don't forget, he's trying to extend phase 1 and get more hostages back during phase 1 before they have to agree to a ceasefire without the total displacement of Hamas from Gaza. And obviously, Trump's plan to get everybody out is obviously not going to happen. And so could that be the strategy? Let's just filibuster and get as many hostages out before inevitably we just unleash hell? Because Trump obviously is leaning on Israel to do it at this point, since there's no support for his plan, which is the Riviera plan. But Netanyahu, as much as he would like to resume hostilities, he needs his hostages back. So it's very complicated at this moment. But when you put together Trump's statement with Rubio's statement, with Netanyahu's statement, this seems like another episode of Israel agreeing to a ceasefire, violating the ceasefire, figuring out some way to blame the Palestinians for the collapse of the ceasefire, and the brutality continues. I hope I'm wrong about that, but this is at this sort of awkward sort of standoff stage right now, and it's a very, very tense and tenuous moment, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the game that Netanyahu is playing is get as many hostages as possible,
right,
before he finds a pretense to continue.
Exactly. That's what it looks like to me.
And once he does, Trump's going to go all in. They're going to just, create a narrative about what Hamas did to cause them to have to react to it and defend Israel and defense of Israel at all costs. And that's going to be it, man. They're going to go full on. And that's where you're really going to have a lot of people who, decided to take Vance's shaft for that speech are going to have a lot to answer for later on when this administration turns murderous and genocidal. It'd be very interesting. All these people who felt, Harris, if you're just talking about, hey, as long as there's something good, we'll get behind it. Why? You were talking about she was offering $25,000 down payment for a house. Now, I'm not saying you should have voted for Harris. We didn't. We didn't believe in that. But same logic applies, right? If the genocide was negotiable, provided there were good things you could support, I mean, you could argue that with them too.
Right. You could argue that in either direction. And not to repeat myself, but I think I should, since apparently we're the only people who seem to have noticed this this tweet. The United States will back the decision they make. Israel will have to decide what they will do about the deadline today imposed on the release of all hostages. That was the deadline that he set from the Oval Office when he ran his mouth, saying, I think they should break the ceasefire if they don't get all of the hostages back. He was egging them on to unleash hell on the Palestinians. Right. That was an attempt to sabotage the deal. And the only reason Netanyahu didn't do it is because he knows he's toast if those hostages do not come back at this point. That's the only reason. That's the only reason that hell was not unleashed, is because Netanyahu was like, you know what? I can't go there yet. Phase 1 is not over. We need as many hostages out during phase 1 before we can come up with an excuse to sabotage it in phase 2. Ideally, all of them. Ideally, he will filibuster and filibuster and filibuster and get all of them out and then come up with an excuse, as they have done countless times in the past. This is the Israeli playbook. They agree to ceasefires and they break ceasefires, and they blame the Palestinians, and the world backs them up on it because there's nobody to take the Palestinian side. A child can't take the Palestinian side in Germany without being run down by a dozen cops.
Right. That's been the history of Israel from the beginning. From the beginning, they have always. It's in the book behind me here, going all the way back to 1948. They were going to negotiate a resolution with the Palestinians with the UN, and there were actually internal memos of them deciding, you know what, let's not make an agreement. We'll probably get something better later. They have just, their aim has always been the Greater Israel Project. Everything that they do only really makes sense in that context. It's not consistent with people who want to live in peace with the Palestinians. It's consistent with people who are constantly trying to find pretexts for taking more of their land so that their overall project of creating this greater Israel can be achieved. And to that end, they have spent over 70 years demonizing this population.
Of course. And we didn't even talk about, we're going to get more into this on Tuesday. We didn't even talk about Rubio's, just absolutely insane saber rattling about Iran, talking about how they're the most destabilizing force in the Middle East. No, not the white colony that dropped down into the middle of the Arab world with the full backing of the United States military and a murderous expansionist agenda. No, that's not the destabilizing factor in the Middle East. It's the Arab nation. If you're a white European settler and you set up shop in the Middle East and you find the presence of Arabs to be destabilizing, you can turn around and go the fuck home. I mean, that's a peaceful way to handle it. But no, it's Iran that's the destabilizing force in the Middle East, not Israel. Absolutely psychotic. Absolutely just blood in the eyes psychotic, which is what you'd expect from a little pimp like Marco Rubio.
Of course, yeah. I think to get a lot of people in the space to notice it, you're gonna have to retweet it out from like Joe Biden's account or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah.
Now, oh my God! Did you see what he said?
Right.
This crickets.
Yep.
Crickets.
Please clap.